After the tragic killing of George Floyd and many other Black people this past spring and summer at the hands of law enforcement, protests erupted across the country. The reporters and journalists who covered these events often became targets of the same brutality, calling into question whether the press freedoms outlined in the First Amendment extend to protecting journalists from the police. Reporters who were out in the field during previous waves of protests display their press badges and were left alone, tacitly understood to be observers and not participants. However, this past year was different. Online videos show reporters identifying themselves as press and still being assaulted with rubber bullets and batons. One CNN reporter was even arrested in the middle of a televised broadcast.
Some police departments have also misrepresented or obscured the truth when giving their accounts of journalist-involved assaults or arrests. Josie Wan, a Los Angeles-based reporter, was arrested for allegedly interfering with the protesters' arrest and not identifying herself as the press. However, videos taken at the scene show her verbally identifying herself as a reporter and wearing a press badge and a lanyard around her neck. Her case was dropped for, quote, insufficient evidence, but incidents like these are worrying because they are biased toward the police narrative and put journalists in unnecessary danger. The First Amendment of the Constitution guarantees freedom of the press, which means that the government may not make any laws or act in a way that impedes or prevents someone from fulfilling their responsibilities as a journalist. Police officers who purposely go after reporters during protests could be violating these rights, creating grounds for a lawsuit.
Goyette versus City of Minneapolis is one of these lawsuits and is backed by the ACLU. We interviewed freelance journalist and main plaintiff Jared Goyette for the reasoning behind his particular case.
Like what happened after George Floyd was killed was different in the sense of how quickly escalation happened and what the lack of communication with crowds and the way that journalists were not just incidentally targeted but deliberately targeted with a degree of like personal animosity, I would say, from police in those days.
Goyette was standing away from the crowd and announcing himself as a member of the press when police officers turned their weapons on him and shot him in the face. Another police officer approached him in his car and threatened him directly.
He basically said that I wish I could hurt you right now. And I think that I do think that in the days that followed, they probably had some internal orders to change the way they were dealing with press, being like, hey, you can't be so, just a reminder, we can't target the journalists, guys. I don't know. It's pure speculation because it didn't seem like the direct animosity like sustained itself as much. It seemed like there was a shift back. But to know that, I guess a lesson I took from it is that like if they, there at least are officers out there who do see us that way, and they will resort to violence if they feel that they can get away with it.
Constitutional laws are hard to do away with completely, but they can be weakened. If the law enforcement defendants win a case that involves journalists' rights during a protest, it would set a precedent for the level of protection a reporter can expect in similar situations and could determine whether they would be protected at all. It would also be a blow to police accountability and transparency. Journalists' rights during protests are now an important point of contention in an already escalating situation, and the decisions that courts make are crucial for either preserving or undermining this country's democracy.